I'm Tom Bilyeu, the host of Impact Theory. I recently had an amazing 4-hour conversation with Balaji Srinivasan, who put up $1 million of his own money on the line to bring our attention to what may be the worst financial crisis of our time. You have to check out the entire interview for yourself, but if you're short on time, here's a summary made using PodFast, an awesome AI-powered tool that can summarize any text, video, or audio content in seconds. Let's get into it. We started off by discussing the current state of the U.S. economy and its potential for collapse due to a series of factors, including a looming sovereign debt crisis, internal political conflict, external superpower conflict with China and Russia, technological shocks like AI and cryptocurrency, and the uncensoring of social media. The financial system's evolution to evade past pattern recognition means the next collapse may not look like the 2008 financial crisis, but it will likely require bailouts or printing of money. Balaji believes the U.S. is at least as serious a crisis as the 2008 crisis, and Bitcoin is one way to have outside money, as it is built to be difficult to seize. The collapse begins with the debt crisis, and too slow is too late in reacting to it. The collapse may happen much faster than people anticipate, and the speed of events in the past has shown how quickly things can unravel. Balaji describes the current situation as a rogue wave phenomenon, where multiple shocks are hitting the U.S. economy at the same time. We talk about an ongoing banking crisis in the U.S., with many banks technically near insolvency. According to Jim Bianco, founder of Bianco Research, there have been 4 large bank failures in the last 2 months, with deposits leaving banks regularly. Balaji emphasizes that this is not a bank run, but a bank walk, with deposits moving to places with higher interest rates. The government's policies around getting people into homes and affordable housing goals are part of the reason for the crisis. The Fed and the Treasury devalued treasuries, causing what was once considered the safest asset in the world to become the riskiest. This has affected not only the largest banks but also other banks and insurers that bought bonds, where double-digit percentages of their portfolio are held in unsafe assets. There is a fiscal crisis due to the massive amount of debt, which cannot be lowered due to inflation, and a commercial real estate crisis due to remote work and crime in blue cities. The government's printing of money as a solution to the crisis is not sustainable in the long run, and the system is starting to creak as more commercial and consumer failures occur. Balaji discusses several financial issues, including the $4 trillion in unfunded pensions, spiking auto loan defaults, and the resumption of student loan payments after a multi-year holiday due to COVID-19. He argues that forgiving student loan debt is a difficult issue, as it would mean marking down $1 trillion in someone else's books. Additionally, Balaji discusses the issue of de-dollarization, which is happening at a stunning pace as more countries are using their own currencies for trade and holding assets in currencies other than the US dollar. He suggests that the lack of financial innovation in the US and the country's massive debt load make it vulnerable to competition from other countries, with China being the most obvious contender. Balaji argues that the US became the dominant power in the world through a deliberate plan for world domination, and that the U.S. system was better than the Soviet one from 1945 to 1991. However, without the Soviet threat, the U.S. system has become less benevolent and more vulnerable to criticism. The U.S. was heavily involved in Eastern Europe in the 1990s and overall was doing a decent job with foreign policy. However, the late 90s saw unchecked power and the beginning of messianic crusading. The Iraq War was a huge mistake and destabilized many Middle Eastern countries with no accountability for the enormous cost. Today, there is a potential currency crisis due to inflation, and the Federal Reserve may have lied to investors about raising interest rates, causing huge losses. The bond market is complicated, but it can be compared to Apple selling old iPhones and then releasing a better model, causing the old ones to depreciate and resulting in losses for buyers. The Federal Reserve knew about the potential for depreciation but sold the bonds anyway, possibly committing fraud. Balaji discusses the current economic situation in the U.S., focusing on the various signals that something may be going on. These signals include the debt ceiling being way up, U.S. banks being near insolvency, and the commercial real estate sector being poised for disaster. We also talk about how printing money can devalue everyone's money in the long run, and compares it to an official counterfeiting process. We discuss how the money printed disproportionately went to the coasts, causing a wealth distribution gap between Democrats and Republicans. By talking about these issues, People may become aware of the problems and potentially speed up the process, but it is still important to be realistic and acknowledge the underlying issues. Balaji and I discuss how the financial system uses deniable and invisible ways to impose costs on the political opposition, both individually and collectively. We use the analogy of a camouflage predator that strikes its target without raising its fight or flight response. We also discuss how fine print is used as a strategy to get people to sign contracts without fully reading or understanding them. We explore the concept of the U.S. exporting its inflation and how this played a role in causing food price spikes that helped trigger the Arab Spring. We also discuss how the debt-to-GDP ratio may not necessarily lead to an economic apocalypse, but it is wise to hedge investments with assets such as Bitcoin. The conversation shifts to how the current generation in the U.S. has inherited a scaled economic system without having to fight for it, causing a forgotten memory of what it took to earn and maintain it. Balaji explains the difference between founding and inheriting, and how the response to superpower competition is crucial in maintaining top status. We touched on the topic of China's rise and the U.S.'s decline in certain industries, specifically steel. Balaji discusses the importance of competition and the desire to be the best. Culturally, people are shying away from wanting to be dominant or competitive, which is not conducive to human flourishing. We also address the idea that a big war or a common enemy may not necessarily bring people together, but rather exacerbate already existing divisions between parties in the U.S. Balaji cites data showing how bipartisanism has worsened over the past 70 years, specifically in Congress and social networks. We discuss how the conflict in the Western world is tribal rather than ideological, and this can be seen in the constant flipping of positions in response to issues like COVID. The U.S. is described as disunited, with individuals and states divided along Democratic and Republican lines, and even symbols like the American flag are contested. The only thing that most Americans can agree on is the value of the dollar as a unifying economic factor. However, the potential for a currency crisis and alternatives like cryptocurrency and gold could further accelerate this pull apart. The collapse of a system requires a successor, and in the U.S., there is currently a lack of consensus on a viable alternative. We talk about China's rise as a global superpower through its development of new diplomatic strategies, its increasing economic influence worldwide, and the potential for de-dollarization and decentralization of currencies. We touch on the possibility of Bitcoin reaching $1 million and the concept of modern monetary theory, which suggests that governments can print as much money as they want as long as inflation is kept in check. Balaji suggests that the rise of cryptocurrencies and the decentralization of currencies may lead to a fracturing of the global financial system and the emergence of multiple currencies, possibly including Bitcoin. He brought up the idea of a $1 trillion coin being minted by the U.S. government as a way around the debt ceiling, which has received support from some economists in the past. The idea behind the coin is to prevent negotiation with Republicans over the debt ceiling. I'm not entirely sure this coin would work, as it would cause inflation. The conversation then transitions to discussing the potential motivations of those who support the coin concept. The idea of financial camouflage is introduced, where financial instruments are designed to confuse people. Balaji believes that many financial decisions are evil in the short term and stupid in the long term. The financial system reminds him of Nietzsche's will to power, and how it's difficult to decipher between well-intentioned people making a mistake and people with malicious intentions. We discuss how the finance industry on Wall Street differs from other sectors, as financial instruments are often zero-sum games where each party tries to deceive the other. Balaji explains how the financial system is set up to deceive individuals, and the contracts are often weaponized to fool the other party. We also talk about the concept of fiat currency and how it borrows from the future to ensure short-term stability in the economy, the Western present, and how it is holding on to the present without adapting to the future, which could lead to a catastrophic event in the future. We touch on the idea that G7 countries are running out of money and may attempt asset seizure in the future, which could result in financial instability. We discuss the interpretation of democracy in the U.S., highlighting the perversion of democracy under FDR and the potential consequences of Henry Wallace becoming president in 1945 due to his Soviet sympathies. The argument is made that a true democracy means a balance between right and left, rather than a single party with no real differences. We also touch on the idea of preserving the brand of democracy throughout history, citing examples like Lincoln and Woodrow Wilson. The current state of democracy in the US is becoming more like warring tribes rather than a unified nation. Look at France's multiple republics as compared to the few resets in the US's history. We talk about different eras of America, from America 3.0 during the Bill of Rights era to America 4.0 during FDR's presidency. And Balaji argues that America needs to move towards America 5.0 optimized for the internet era. The ideologies that worked in the 20th century, such as communism, fascism, and democratic capitalism, are not optimized for the internet era. Network-first ideologies are needed, and they must start with the keyboard and laptop. Balaji also discusses the US military and fiat currency, arguing that these are fake concepts, and they prop each other up. The discussion also touches on the idea of religion as an organizing principle and how it can be a plastic concept that can be molded to different forms depending on the situation. We discuss different beliefs about the melding of ideologies and states in the modern world. Balaji argues that the active ingredient for success is not democracy or morality, but rather leadership and a strong operating system. We explore the concept of the network state, which includes social networks, cryptocurrencies, and peer-to-peer relationships. Balaji predicts that the network state will become the organizing principle for the next world. And we talk about how this trend is already evident in the increasing popularity of cryptocurrency and the digitization of capitalism. Balaji also believes that the network state will enable the creation of new countries and offer a new paradigm for economic and political organization. Whoa, was that awesome or what? I'm Tom Bilyeu, and I'd like to thank you for listening to this PodFast summary of my conversation with Balaji Srinivasan. If you enjoyed this content, please like and subscribe. See you next time.